The best of Money Matters. The Big Story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin Jeong. The cost of living has emerged as the top concern of Singaporeans heading into this year's general election. Concerns over jobs and unemployment came in second, while the state of the economy followed in third place. These are part of findings from a recent study by Blackbox Research's sentiment tracker, SensingSG. Now, the survey was done earlier this month and involved Singaporeans eligible to vote in this year's electoral contest. The next general election must be held by November 23rd this year. It will be Singapore's 14th since independence and the first under the country's fourth-generation leadership led by Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. As we edge closer to GE 2025, how should we make sense of these findings? And do these findings have any impact on parties in their campaigning approach in the elections? Well, to find out more, joining us today to share his insights is Glenn Wray, who is the head of strategy and marketing at Blackbox Research. Glenn, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Hongbin. My pleasure to join you today.
Thank you so much for joining me, Glenn. Glenn, SensingSG's data comes from an online survey of 1,500 Singaporeans and PRs aged 21 years old and above. How significant are surveys and data points like these for parties in their campaigning approach in the general elections?
Well, I think SensingSG has the potential to be very significant for the campaigning parties, actually. SensingSG has been around for about a year and a half now, and when we first built and designed the platform, we did so with policymakers, researchers, and think tanks in mind mostly, actually, rather than political players per se. However, with this being an election year, we took the opportunity of our latest quarterly run of the data to take a closer look at GE 2025. So yeah, without doubt, I think political parties will have things of interest to look for. At the end of the day, data provides actionable insights into voter priorities and concerns, and it should allow the campaigns to allocate their resources more effectively and target key demographics. I suspect that it will also help the parties understand the demographics of undecided voters more, and they can therefore tailor their messaging to address specific needs that come from that as well, really. So, yeah, in a nutshell, that's where I think the parties might look at it, SensingSG as being valuable to them.
I see. Well, Glenn, then let's take a deeper look at the findings now. According to Blackbox's research, 88% of Singaporeans believe the country is heading in the right direction. What are the main drivers behind the rise in overall community sentiment in Singapore in 2024?
Well, yeah, 88% is a really good score indeed, actually. So I think people are thinking things are going pretty well in Singapore at the moment. Just as a reference point, when the same question was asked in the UK and the US ahead of their elections last year, the community optimism score was well below 50%. So the Singapore community is feeling pretty good. And this is also an 11-point rise on the same metric this time last year. So it marks a significant improvement. And what this illustrates, I think, is that efforts to address community concerns have been well received over the past 12 months. But at the end of 2023 and into early 2024, inflation and cost of living pressures were really acute at the time and were biting hard. So things have improved on a macro level since then. And the government took pretty strong and active measures to handle the cost of living. We've seen billions of dollars spent on GST vouchers, CDC vouchers, USAID rebates, as well as cash payments through the assurance package. So broadly, it looks like all of those initiatives hit their mark in the way that the ruling party intended.
I see. Then how do you interpret the broad optimism in Singaporean sentiment despite the political secession, economic challenges, and controversies of 2024?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned despite the political transition, because you're quite right in the sense that could have been a little bit of a hiccup. It was something different and historic and hadn't happened in about 20 years in Singapore. But all the data that we've seen has shown that it really passed off very smoothly. I think Prime Minister Wong entered office with a deep reservoir of trust and faith from his time as finance minister. And it's really been very smooth sailing since he took over the helm, to be honest with you. So if anything, there's been a minor uptick in positivity since the transition. And as for scandals and other controversies, as we've seen, and not only in this quarter's data, but in all 5 waves we've done so far, anytime there's a big headline story that relates to controversy among parliamentarians or similar, it doesn't really capture the front of mind attention of Singaporeans as much as bread and butter issues do. So I think optimism has been on an upward trend and hasn't really had any significant blows over the past 12 months at all, really.
I see. Well, also in the findings, it looks like 78% of Singaporeans rate their personal financial situation as quite good or better than the year before. So what factors do you believe are contributing to the significant improvement in personal financial sentiment?
Yeah, I think this aligns closely with the trends we spoke about in the previous question. We don't ask respondents granular questions about why they're feeling more positive in regard to their personal finances, but the data speaks for itself. This too has been a 10-point or above increase over the past 12 months. So again, I think it's the cost of living measures, They were well directed. They were directed at making sure people had wallets to manage everyday personal financial challenges, and that seems to have worked pretty well. Inflation has come down from its peaks in 2023, so that will have eased pressure on household expenses somewhat. I'm sure your listeners are probably screaming at the radio now saying, well, they haven't come down enough, but it's definitely true that the problems aren't as pernicious as they were 12 months ago.
I see. Well, then, given the rise in community satisfaction here, what role do you think public services and infrastructure development have played in shaping this optimistic outlook?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we haven't seen any strong direct link to the quality of public services and infrastructure to a direct rise in positive sentiment or in personal financial sentiment. I think this is more of a hygiene factor for Singapore. And I think we're lucky for those of us who live here that governance standards here are very strong, the public infrastructure is excellent, and in the vast majority of cases, public service delivery is very high. And I think so long as the government keeps a handle on that, then that will contribute maybe tangentially to a feeling of positive sentiment, whether that's socially or financially. So I think that's probably what's going on there.
I see. Well, 27% of Singaporeans, according to the report, remain undecided on who they will vote for in the upcoming general election. So with 27% of Singaporeans undecided, especially among younger voters, how do you think political parties should approach this demographic to kind of sway their decisions?
Yeah. So about 1 in 4 altogether are undecided, and that rises to about 1 in 3 of Singaporeans under 30, which is very fascinating. I mean, we've got some recommendations and insights, but I'm sure it may not be so surprising or groundbreaking to the campaign strategists. But the data we found, it does suggest that a pragmatic, policy-driven approach will resonate better than a personality-driven or populist campaign. And for younger voters in particular, the concerns that rise to the surface most for them are affordable housing, job stability, and even climate action, actually, which is often a neglected issue on the campaign trail. So those will be issues that they may want to look out for. In terms of how they engage these voters, there are 2 main avenues to do so. I mean, there's the old school fundamental boots on the ground approach. I mean, you've got to meet voters where they are. It could be through local community engagements, your meet the people sessions, your door-to-door campaigning, as well as through small group dialogues. That will, create that personal connection and reinforce trust. But what's going to be very interesting indeed will be how the election plays out in the digital space. As you know, I mean, digital platforms and social media are becoming ever more important in terms of how campaigns are run and how parties connect with their voters. So young people spend an awful lot of time online, and that's going to be a key battleground this time around, probably more so than ever.
Right.
So the campaign strategists, I'm sure, are racking their brains to develop as robust and exciting a digital campaign as they possibly can, and that would be time well spent, I would say.
I see. Well, on the other hand, the survey shows that older Singaporeans are the most certain about their voting intentions, with 73% quite certain. Do you think this is due to deeper political alignment or a more stable financial situation among older voters?
Well, I think you've given me the answer already, actually. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Both factors will play a big role. I think older voters, whether Singaporean or anywhere across the world, they tend to have stronger historical alignment with their political party of choice. This is shaped by decades of engagement and trust built over time. That affinity, in a way, you could say, has already become entrenched with their personality and their taste. So it is much more difficult to change their voting preference at a later stage in life. As you say, financial stability is important. The longer we spend on the planet, the longer time we spend in office earning money. So in most cases, older people tend to have a little bit more financial stability, and with financial stability comes greater confidence and a greater sense of self-security in terms of where to place your vote when it comes to the election booth.
Right, right. Now, economic issues such as the cost of living, inflation, and unemployment are identified as top concerns for voters. Meanwhile, housing costs have been highlighted as a key issue, particularly among voters under 49. So, Glenn, what's driving the sentiment and what policies or approaches do you believe would resonate most with the demographics? Do you think Budget 2025 will have any impact?
Well, I think economic issues in Singapore are always front of mind. So just in a broad stroke, that sort of answers the first part of that question. Zoning in on the housing affordability portion, especially for the younger Singaporeans, I think is quite fascinating. Housing affordability concerns have always been and probably always will be an area of acute concern for people who are entering a stage of life where they're getting married, they want to maybe start thinking about having children. So having a home above their heads is obviously going to be the biggest issue to them at that particular stage of life. And this has risen to the surface a lot more in recent years, probably in large part due to the pandemic. That slowed down BTO bills and created a bit of a supply bottleneck. So anxiety really heightened over the past couple of years, albeit it's starting to allay a little bit now. And truly, housing affordability can be as much an emotive issue as an economic one. The government has tried many times to point out that buying a HDB flat for Singaporeans is a much more affordable and realistic proposition than the equivalent housing purchase would be for someone living in another metropolitan major international city. But it's very difficult for that message to land favourably when people are probably more preoccupied with headlines that talk about $1 million HDB flats. So I think that communication message or that area of communication will become a key one as the election comes around. And Budget 2025, I'm sure the government sees that as a big opportunity to allay concerns somewhat and to announce a suite of initiatives that will make people feel a little bit more comfortable about things. So let's see what the Prime Minister has in store for us about a month from now. But it'll be interesting to see if we see some policies that relate to stabilising housing prices or enhancing affordability for first-time homebuyers.
I see. Well, additionally, 88% of voters consider local governance, quality, and service delivery as important when choosing their candidates. How significant do you think, Glenn, the emphasis on local governance, quality, and service delivery is in shaping voters' decisions compared to, national level concerns?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this was a very interesting and telling part of the insights that came back from the survey this time around, because it's easy, I think, for people to think, Singapore is quite a small city-state and people might focus their attention more on the national level things, what's on the front page of the newspaper. But this was quite illustrative in showing us that actually it's more heartland concerns matter more than national level ones. And that relates to what may be seen as small things, but to what for most people are very important everyday things. How clean is their estate? How accessible and visible is their MP? How credible is their MP representing them in government? How often do they see the MP at the coffee shop or in door-knocking initiatives and things like that? So this really showed us that decisions at the voting booth are often made by what people encounter at their front door, and we expect fundamental issues like what I just mentioned to really be core things that the parties may wish to focus attention on when the election campaigning comes around. Yeah.
I see. Well, then, in what ways can political candidates improve their local presence and service delivery to, satisfy the voters who can consider candidate quality and, local infrastructure crucial?
Well, it's just the everyday things that would be part of any MP or candidate's playbook, really. Just making sure they're out there, making sure their message is clear and understandable, making sure that the messages are tailored to each segment or demographic that they want to speak to, and just ensuring that the quality of candidates that are fielded don't let them down, as we've seen in one or two cases in recent elections. I think as long as people feel heard, they're not being patronised, that the people representing the party have credible policies that are realistic, I think all of these things will matter most to people and will give them a better chance when it comes to the election.
I see. Well, the survey also suggests that Singaporean voters are more pragmatic than distracted by political scandals. How do you think political parties should then, tailor their campaigns to reflect voters' preference for tangible, practical solutions?
At the end of the day, this is just a crystallizing call to action to the parties and to the candidates to not be too high-minded in how they communicate with the electorate. I think if they focus on the rice bowl issues, really connect their proposed policies to how it's going to alleviate their concerns, which, like we've discussed over the past 20 minutes or so, come back to the things that we always are aware of, housing, cost of living, inflation, then I think that's going to land most. And in Singapore, we're not the sort of environment where big personality plays or big populist moves really have a great impact. People tend to see through that a little bit more, and I think practicality will trump populism this time around again as well.
I see. Well, how important then do you think the quality of candidates in each constituency will be in determining the outcome of GE 2025?
That's a tough one to answer. I think candidate quality, it goes without saying, is very, very important. But in Singapore's system, you have the GRCs, which allows you maybe to overcome the dilution of a ticket with one or two members who may not be perceived as strong as the others, so long as you've got one or two big hitters. So in the big GRC tickets, I think that gives the ruling party a bit of an advantage because they've probably got a greater field to select from, and they've got more visible parliamentarians to choose from as well. But so long as the opposition parties feel people that don't trip over their lines too often and just act and speak credibly, then I think they'll be all right. Yeah, but again, individual candidate quality, while important, may not be totally critical. I think at the end of the day, people, and the majority of people, as our survey showed, already have their intentions in mind, and performance of the parties over the years matters a lot as well.
I see. Well, given the current sentiment, how do you foresee the balance of national issues versus local issues in the GE 2025 election outcome?
Yeah, local issues and national issues in many ways are inextricably linked. But I think there is such deep trust over the quality of governments at the national level. I think many people in the Singaporean community almost take for granted that the current government is doing a good job in most matters, and that the national level approach and national strategy is being reasonably well delivered. So yeah, I think, like I said, if there are going to be anything that moves the needle, it may come down to things, what is happening in the heartland level, at the local level, rather than the national one.
I see. Then Glenn, what do you think are the risks for political parties if they fail to focus on everyday issues like, cost of living and local governance as opposed to broader national political themes?
I think the risk exists that if you don't come down close to the ground, then you could alienate your voters. I think it's been a common refrain over the past few elections that occasionally politicians and the candidates can be seen to be a little bit out of touch, and this can be where they fail to really engage on things like the cost of chicken rice at the hawker centre raising by $1.20 over the past year or something like that, or they've raised for complaints about cleanliness in their estate, or a neighbour who's hoarding or making noise in the floor above them and it not being addressed. I think it's going to be very crucial for the candidate to prove that these are the sort of issues that they care about as deeply as the residents or the population themselves, and that they have the commitment and the desire to really resolve those kind of things.
I see. And before we let you go here, Glenn, what else will you be looking out for in the lead up to GE 2025?
Well, for me personally, I've been in Singapore for 16 years now, so for me as well as for many Singaporeans, especially the younger ones, this will be the first time seeing a new Prime Minister lead the ruling party into an election. So I'm going to be very fascinated to see how PM Lawrence Wong gets on in his first election campaign as party leader. We already know he's a steady and trusted economic steward. So I'll be watching out to see if this campaign reveals any new shades of his leadership and personality that we haven't seen before. And as I alluded to a little bit earlier in our discussion, I think the role that digital media plays in this election will be very interesting, as well as how the challenge of misinformation is tackled. We've seen very obviously in big cases in international elections like in the US and UK that misinformation is becoming a really difficult challenge for people to overcome. So as more of the election proportionately is spent online than perhaps in the past, I'll be watching to see how that plays out as well.
I see. Well, thank you so much, Glenn, for joining me today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was Glenn Wray, who is the head of strategy and marketing at Blackbox Research. This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.